everybody. Thanks for staying with us for the entire day. All right, we are down to our last panel and probably I'm not going to say my favorite one because it's like teaching children, but wait, I do have favorites there too. But today we are talking romantasy, monster, paranormal, all the freaky stuff. So I'm actually moderating this one, so I'm just going to go over here. And I'm going to stand here and be like, tell us about yourself, Sebastian, first, and your latest book, and then we'll get into all my questions.
My name is Sebastian Nothwell. I write historical romance and romantasy, and my latest book is a fantasy of manners romance called Filenza.
I love fantasy of manners. Sorry, my face was just like.
What does that mean? Fantasy of manners.
It's fantasy with a focus on the social structure and hierarchy and kind of political manipulation rather than, wizards and dragons, what have you.
Cool. But if you had political intrigue amongst dragons, I would be there for that too. Anybody here a writer? You can maybe write my story. Kass, you just told me a funny story about Nascosta. What got you started?
I did. So I'm Kass. I write cozy, spicy, gas lamp monster romantasy, which is a bunch of words to say that I write like a monster romance in a historical setting. Imagine Legends and Lattes, but they fuck. And you got the end and you were like, they kissed and now it's over. That's where I come in. Yes. And I actually came to Monster Romance via Sarah McLean, and she recommended Sam Nascosta's Morning Glory Milking Farm.
Oh yeah,
so good. And I was one of her patrons, and I was on like a tier where you got to like request stories, and she knew that I wrote, and I was like, for my story, I want you to write me a bear shifter. And she's like, girl, I don't have time to write you a bear shifter. You're gonna have to write it yourself. So I did.
Was it a polar bear?
It was a polar bear. It's this guy right here.
I love it. Okay, so I think this has come up before earlier today, but I really do want to dig a little bit into what is the deal with paranormal romantasy monster? Like, is there a spectrum? Is it just a marketing ploy? What do you think about that, Sebastian?
I feel like romantasy leans harder on the fantasy genre than paranormal does.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas paranormal, at least as I understand it, has a fairly set structure of tends to be kind of an urban fantasy
Modern
setting, like contemporary, and also I've got a werewolf boyfriend, a vampire boyfriend, a shifter boyfriend, a boyfriend who came from the moon, like just someone from everyone.
So someone for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in your mind, it's more about the characters?
The way I wrote romantasy, at least, it's more about like, here's the fantastical setting, and also there's a romance happening in it. And yes, the world building is there, and yes, the adventure is there, but the focus is in large part on the romance.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something we talk a lot about. I'm in like a fantasy romance authors group, and it's something that we talk a lot about, like what is the difference between fantasy romance versus romantasy versus paranormal versus monster. And it's kind of like there's lots of like squares and rectangles happening. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. And so like generally speaking, they're all fantasy romance. But then you get into like romantasy tends to follow many of those more traditional fantasy tropes and plot lines and settings where we're like going on a quest and there's big, well, unless you're cozy romantasy, but there's like, it's less like a contemporary setting with like vampires and ghosts and werewolves. Romantasy tends to be more like sword and sorcery fantasy feeling. And then to me, the difference between monster and paranormal is that paranormal is, we kind of make this joke that if like, do they have sex as humans? If they have sex in a mostly humanoid form and it's in a contemporary setting, it's probably paranormal. Whereas like in monster romance, it's like either they don't have a humanoid form at all, or they bang in their monster form because that's like their humanoid form is like not themselves. There's so much like nuance, like we debate like vampires. Are they a monster? Yes, no. Okay, does a vampire romance count as a monster romance or is it paranormal? And a lot of times it comes down to like the vibes and the like the story structure that you're following and the tropes that you're dealing with versus, I mean, it's something that we struggle with too.
Well, because it's constantly shifting and
Yeah.
changing and evolving, I'll say, because, you know, monster romance to me is relatively new.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the characters, the creatures a little bit, because there's a big difference in romantasy, I think, about the creatures or the character versus paranormal, where sort of like where I grew up with like the vampires and the shapeshifters to the monsters where you can have a kraken or a polar bear or a kraken with a big dick. And I have questions about that as well. So, you know, when you decided what you were going to be going into writing this particular genre, what was it that attracted you to it, Sebastian?
Being able to write happily ever afters for my characters that were not necessarily possible in a historical context was a huge draw for me. And then also taking it out of the realm of reality allows me to be a little more creative with anatomy.
Which we will talk about.
I like started by reading monster romance and I noticed very quickly that there's this theme that monster romance tends to feature neurodiverse people and disabled people, and the heroines tend to be people that are generally marginalized in some way. Monster romance, I find the readers and authors tend to be very queer, very neurodivergent. And I think it's because in monster romance, it's the thing that makes you other is what attracts your partner to you. And so it's not that like they are loving you in spite. And so in this case, in monster romance, it tends to be like a very on the nose kind of allegory, if you will, for feeling othered in some way. Sometimes it's a very on the nose, like very stigmatizing personification that can get iffy. But really to me, it's about like, I love this person for the thing that makes them different. And that is what I love about them and what makes me attracted to them versus I love them in spite of that. And that's something that I think monster romance really celebrates is being different.
I'm gonna stay with you on this question about, I'm gonna stay with characters a little bit. Because I think the one thing that really strikes me about this whole spectrum is that we never know who the monsters are. We never really know who the bad guys are. We never really, it always turns it on its head in my perspective. And I'm wondering if you feel the same way about your monsters and when Sebastian will ask you about your characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we play with a lot, this idea that like the people that you assume would be the bad guys aren't necessarily, in my world, the bad guys are the elves. They're really pretty, and they are really bad. And the like big scary monster dudes are like cinnamon rolls that are like, oh my God, can I bake you bread? And that's just something that I tend to be very vulnerable. In my personal life, the monsters in my personal life were never people that you would expect or peg. And so in my experience, the people that I've met that were monstrous were very presentable and put together and charismatic. And it's been the weirdos that every single time have been amazing.
I think that's 100% true for me as well. And that's why serial killers get away with for so long, right? The boy next door, blah, blah. How about you, Sebastian?
Oh yeah, very similarly, a lot of the villains in both my historicals and my romantasies, it's whoever is living up most to the ideal of the culture at the time, that's who you need to watch out for. Because they're going to, one, fly under the radar for anyone looking for aberrant behavior, and two, they are going to be ruthless in upholding that cultural standard.
Yeah, that system that
Yeah,
inherently gives them power.
yeah.
Sounds shockingly familiar. We're gonna get into that right now. But do you think that there's a reason that paranormal and romantasy, I'm not gonna say paranormal because I think it's had its time. This is my opinion. Romantasy and monster is really, for me, on the rise. Like, I'm seeing so many more people reading it, loving it, showing off their covers in the subways. Is there that would be me. Yeah. But like, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I would hide my covers because people were so judgmental. And now I'm like, F you, be judgmental. I'm gonna read my book. So do you feel like there's a reason why we're reading more of this?
I have like a 20-minute answer, so I'm gonna try to condense. I think that, like, generally speaking, AFAB folks have, assigned female at birth, I'm using acronyms, have for a really long time, there's been incredibly a lot of suppression and this idea that, like, good girls don't want sex. And I think that we've kind of had this very strong through line that, like, romance novels were a way for women to express themselves in a way that felt safe for them to tap into that part of themselves that they were not supposed to.
But that was always, if you're talking about the 80s books with the
like bodice rippers,
yeah,
because it removes the responsibility from the reader and the heroine in that story. So, like, she's not responsible for the sex, she didn't want it, but now that it's happening, she might as well enjoy herself. And I think that that was incredibly important at the time. And I think we've kind of, like, we're progressing a little bit that, like, now we can want it, but also we still kind of have those, like, weird, shamey feelings about sex. And so one thing that I think, like, romantasy and monster romance gives us is that we can say, like, oh, well, they're especially kinky because it's part of their culture. And like, and I also think that, like, there's definitely it's becoming more common to talk about your neurodivergence. And I think that those kind of themes echo with those of us that are not neurotypical, that, like, I think in many ways we hear about, like, fae, where, like, they take everything extremely literally. And those of us with autism are like, oh man, my people, I totally want a dude that must tell me the truth. Like, so I think that there's, like, and I think there are elements of traditional publishing is, like, ruled by cis white dudes. And the internet has kind of allowed us to seek out what we want, not what they have decided we should want. And so I think that there were a lot of people that, like, would have loved to be reading it the whole time, but it just couldn't get published.
Like those gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sebastian, why do you think romantasy has hit this? Yes, you all tease that it's not copyrighted.
I think
Actually, nothing's copyrighted anymore, but that's another story.
similarly to monster romance, part of growing up queer is being told that you're the monster. And so after a certain point, you're like, well, maybe monsters are not. So.
No, maybe. No, maybe at all.
And similarly in Romantasy, I think a lot of it is just kind of putting in the romance that seems to be missing from fantasy, or maybe making the romance that is implied in fantasy more explicit, particularly when in the history of the genre, it tends away from three-dimensional female characters, which kind of undercuts the heterosexual romance that always seems kind of like obligated to be there. Whereas like all the tender words being exchanged, all the strong bonds being forged, every major emotional breakthrough in the book, if it happens at all, is happening between two dudes who then just kind of go their separate ways. And somehow don't kiss about it, which is like, okay. So it's kind of just putting the romance back in.
We were robbed of salmon Frodo.
That's counterparts. I think that for me, like, there's a lot of overlap, of course, between Romantasy and monster romance, in that there's monsters in Romantasy and there's romance in monster romance, of course. And they've taken away the paranormal aspect of it, you know, like there's just monsters and there's romance, and there's you know, more fantasy or more romance, more monster. So do you feel like that too? Because I feel like paranormal is, again, I feel like paranormal, like traditional paranormal, is kind of on the downslide, except for Nalini Singh, who's my favorite author. But and Kelsey Cole, also a favorite author. But other than that, you know, like somebody who is a superstar, I'll say, I don't see it as much.
Yeah, I definitely don't either, and it's really interesting. I'm not sure why. I have a bunch of friends who write paranormal. One of the reasons that I wanted to see a bear shifter that didn't feel so traditional family values barefoot in the kitchen to me. Like I love paranormal romance books, and so often I was like, none of these people are queer. I don't know these people. Like, and so I think that, like, I think that's maybe part of it. I don't know.
Well, you have said you know, that more people are seeing themselves in monster romance, which is funny because they're monsters, but we are seeing ourselves in those characters because they have our qualities, not necessarily our features, but our qualities. Would you say that Romantasy is sort of edging out paranormal at all?
I am woefully ignorant in this area. I have not been doing the market research that I should have been.
Sorry. Librarians before.
I think actually, and now I've thought about it, I think part of what it is I think that a lot of Romantasy readers were not romance readers before. I feel like and this is like me, I grew up a fantasy sci-fi reader. I read historical fiction, but not romance, because I was a smart girl. And then
Are you calling us?
no, I'm calling me stupid because, like, I wanted people to take me seriously, and I think that they're just Romantasy has been a bridge for a lot of those people that felt like they couldn't read romance because of like societal or familial expectations put on them. And I think that, like, there's a lot of people that read romance that know how wonderful it is. And I think there's a lot of people that poo-poo it for not being very intellectual or whatever. And we do poo-poo them. Because, you know, now I know better. But I think, like, I used to be like, no, I only read like Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan and like big epic fantasy romance, or not fantasy, just fantasy, capital F fantasy. Maybe people fall in love.
So I guess I should point out that I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these genres.
No, I still read them all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a place for all of them. There's plenty of readers for all of them. But I'm really trying to get a sense of like, why do we read this? And I actually think it's because paranormal was too tame, you know,
Yeah.
like,
No, it
please speak.
is. Sorry. What is the point of having a bear shifter boyfriend? If he's never, like, if he's a human the whole time, like, bang him when he's a human, like, obviously I don't want to have sex with a literal bear.
Wait, in the woods, if you were to run into a man or a bear.
I don't have in my epilogue.
Oh, I see a couple over there.
Don't get me wrong, he is fully a bear when they have sex in my epilogue, but also he has the mind of a human. He's not like, I am a bear. And in paranormal, it's often that there is a human and then an animal that inhabit the same body. And oftentimes they like converse. My bear felt this, my bear said that's my mate. And so like, it's like setting aside those things that are like monstrous, if you will. And so I think you're right, that it is like a little too tame, that it's like, it's flirting with it, but then it like pulls back.
Would you feel the same way about Romantasy that, or, and that it was too tame before, that's why we need to have more happening on the page?
I would say, yeah, I mean, Lord knows I started writing because I was disappointed, so like.
So
I'm sorry.
But it was also like, yeah, it was extraordinarily tame and also like, so you're saying this is a world where dragons and elves can exist, but gay people is a bridge too far to suspect your disbelief. You've created a whole fantasy religion and somehow it's just as homophobic.
real.
The gay dragons, total good book. Okay, yes, question.
I think that you see it a lot, and like kind of looking around the room and the Monster Con that you did back in the fall was super fun. Like you're seeing a lot of the people who grew up on that and women and neurodivergent adjacent that are like, I'm writing the things that disappointed me, the stories that I wanted more of that grew up with all of that, and we're like, well, wait, there's more. And now we have more. So
So reader demand, basically, yeah. And you said internet or self-publishing, which has taken away the gatekeeper so we can write and read what we want. So there's no, I know you want to make sales, of course you want to make sales, you want to make a living, but if you sell one book that you wrote to one person who made a huge impact for them, I think your work is done, your, mortgage might not get paid, but, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to that, like, I think many of us enjoy paranormal romance, like you said. Like, I don't know if anybody read the Love at Stake series with the vampires. Used to do it. I was like, here, I finished it, you can read it next. But now it's that there's more available, exactly. Like, it's not about dropping one for the other, it's about grabbing more to put on your plate.
Yeah, I totally
Because this
agree.
wasn't available before.
Yeah, right, so we just made a bigger plate.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So I do want to talk, and my entire romance book club, all my minions know that I'm going to ask this question. It's my shape of water question, where doesn't always match up. And like one of my very favorite books is Anna Gary's Strange Love. Anybody read it? I love that book because they couldn't have sex right away. They never had traditional sex, and spoiler, sorry for but they had to figure it out. And through the entire book, they really created intimacy around talking about something that they wanted to do. So with your characters, how do you make sure that it's possible, titillating, and possible, and or impossible, and yet what comes out of that impossibility, Sebastian?
I think, again, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna hit every question from the queer angle, but like,
Please.
there's a certain kind of relief in having a sex scene where it's not assumed that it will go one specific way without any discussion beforehand, and like, I think it kind of reflects the lived experience of a lot of people with dysphoria, like having to explain to your partner, okay, this touch is okay, this touch is not okay, this is what it's called, and this is how we're going to do this, and having that be kind of portrayed as part of the experience and not like a negative thing that's stapled onto it to make it different or less than anyone else's experience.
Or glossed over just because.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had people I've seen online, I don't do this, but complain that the couple had to get a condom. They're like, oh, it just totally threw me out of the story. And I'm like, what? But do you need to use condoms?
You do not need to use a condom.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, so people are very weird. We are very weird. How about you, Kass? Oh, wait, I have to go back to Sebastian for one thing. Are all of your characters anatomically able to have sex?
I mean, with a very broad spectrum definition of sex, yes.
I love that answer. Because sex, as you said, is not just as it has been for a long time.
Yeah.
And Kass.
So at this point, all of my characters can put something and something else. I do have like a non-binary shadow shifter who does not have like external genitalia, but has like tentacles, like shadow tentacles that they play with. And I know we mentioned this in our online talk with you, but I really love Sarah Ivy Hill. She wrote this series called The Salt Planet Giants. And it's heterosexual pairings, but I think it's kind of like a really tricky way to present a heteronormative relationship and make people question what they define as sex, because they physically cannot have sex. She is the same size as his penis, like the same size. And they find ways to like be intimate with each other and to experience pleasure together. But there are so many people that are like, but they never have sex. They do. They have a lot of sex. It's just not like P in V heteronormative sex. And so like I have a lot of fun when I'm creating my guy's junk. I go into my like toy drawer and say like, what is gonna feel good for a girl? But also like, I think that these genres allow for like a lot of normalization for those kinds of conversations, like negotiations, and showing how that like you can do it in a sexy, validating way. That it doesn't have to be like this weird, awkward thing, that there are ways for it to be really lovely and romantic and sexy. And I think that's really important for a lot of us.
Which goes back to my earlier question about what do we think is monsters? Because I think that in your books and all the monster books I've read, the monsters are usually the ones that care about their partner's pleasure and they figure it out. And so is that something that is a hallmark, do you think, of?
I think so. I think that I can think of a few exceptions, but generally speaking, monster romance, the like monstrous partner is like really into their partner's pleasure. And I do think that that's like a hallmark of the genre. It tends to be like a little bit kinkier and like very sex forward. But like there's definitely a draw of like these dudes have junk that is made to pleasure their partner. And like in many times, like they've thought for decades about like what they're going to do. And there's obviously like this fantasy element of like, man, wouldn't it be great to have a partner that had fantasized about having a partner the way that I did my entire life. And I think even when it's like same-sex pairings, it tends to be the monstrous partner that tends to be like really into their partner's pleasure, for sure.
Mhm.
I would definitely say that's a hallmark.
And Sebastian, would you say in Romantasy that that it is the fantastical creatures or characters that are more caring of that, or is it more of a mutual caring? I mean, eventually it becomes a mutual thing regardless, but to start out with.
I think. Again, I can only speak to the Romantasy I've written, but it's kind of depends very much on the individuals involved. They're all approaching it with different experiences from different angles, with different cultural hangups or lack thereof. And they're kind of trying to reach a unique understanding together.
I love that because that means your books are not cookie cutter books. They're characters that you created out of care for their individual characteristics, as opposed to, you know, what everybody else is writing. Any questions right now? I know I've done a bunch. Yes.
This is specifically about monster romance. Just based on what I've read, I'm interested in how like monster romance does span contemporary and historical, and I'm sort of wondering, what do you think those are doing differently between like a contemporary monster romance where it's like monster dating service versus like historical monster romance where they're, you know, on a polar expedition?
Yeah, I think it's I think you can kind of like play with different things in each. I think that some of the contemporary monster romances speak really, really nicely to the things that we are struggling with today. Morning Glory Milking Farm, she is an out of work, like she has an advanced degree and cannot make enough money in her field to support herself. So she goes to milk some minotaurs.
It's awesome.
And I think, you know, like I write in a more historical setting only because like my brand of autism is like, well, if there are monsters, why do we still have DoorDash? Like my brain is like butterfly effect, like things should be very different. There are definitely authors that like have handled that in specific ways. There have been monsters the whole time, we just didn't know, and then there was an event that revealed them all to us. There's different ways that people handle that. In my case, I just like cannot, it like breaks my brain. I love to read it, I just can't write it. And I think I've just always been like a nerd that's like, I was born in the wrong time, but also I have anxiety and autism, and maybe I should not have been born in those other times. It's been real bad.
You're also probably somebody who likes DoorDash.
I am somebody who likes DoorDash. So I think it like lets you play with different aspects of things, and for me, it's I just really love those like, we have to go on a horse to go on our journey and
Not have sex, because that's uncomfortable. Oh.
There's a scene where he like reaches around and gets her off on the horse. I'm not gonna get it, but yeah, that's okay.
I feel like it's been spoiled.
Sorry. I'm sorry, did I lose track of your question? I think it's really interesting that that's kind of the two places that it's settled. Because that, and then there's like sci-fi, which tends to be in the future, which is kind of like monster adjacent. But it really tends to be, it's happening like right now, and we have monsters and cell phones. Or it's like a third world fantasy setting where like monsters have always been. There are a few like isekai portal fantasy type scenarios as well. Crystal Luna has an orc series where like women get pulled into like fairy essentially. But I think it's like really interesting, and I'm always really interested to see like, I love reading the contemporary ones because I think they tend to have like really cool commentary on things that are going on socially. And then I love the more like traditional fantasy settings, because they just like speak to my heart. It's like my favorite setting.
So I'm gonna ask Sebastian a similar question in that, since you do write historicals as well. We all know that if you don't know history, it's bound to repeat itself. So a lot of the things you're writing about are happening again and again. So what made you choose historicals versus contemporaries? Well, it's not romantic, it can be romantasy even as a contemporary.
It was more like historical was one of the genres I was told people like me couldn't exist. Whereas like contemporary, my life is proof that I can exist. Whereas historicals is just like, okay, I'm going to find every single one of us. And I'm going to write a story about us.
Absolutely. I love it. So what is the best feedback you've ever gotten about your books? Because I feel like they're very impactful to your readers. Let me give you a second.
I'm gonna cry, I'm sorry. So my third book, The Rake, sorry, I sold out of it, so yeah. But it's about a Selkie, and Selkie lore is kind of riddled with this undertone of SA and non-consensual relationships. And so I didn't super want to write a story about that, but I wanted to write a story about like how you go on and find love after that. And so I've had a lot of people reach out to me after that, sorry, and say that like they're still in a place where they can't experience touch. And that's like a big theme of the book, is that she has like quite a bit of touch aversion. And so he's like, okay, tie me up. And then you can control the level of touch that we experience. And so a lot of people wrote saying like, I still don't know if I'll ever be able to like be touched again, but that it gave them hope. And like, okay, that's like peak of my life right there. So. Hold on a second.
You can take that out of the video. How about you, Sebastian?
I might have to pass, yeah.
So we have about 15, 20 more minutes. Let's start with some questions. I'm sure I'll come up with more as we go along. Oh, yes, Sam.
So I kind of have a question for Sebastian. As a queer person myself, you have written like historical books, but they tend to also have someone who's in the working class or lower class. And I really like that just because queer people existed at all levels in society. Can you talk maybe a little bit about why you choose to have that?
One thing that gets to me about a lot of historical fiction, like in film, TV, movies, books, all across the board, it's a lot of times it's a fantasy about wealth. And that fantasy tends to ignore the realities of labor. And my brand of autism is that I can't stop thinking about labor.
Yes. Use it.
So it's a lot of historical fiction glossing over what the servants are doing while the rich people are off gallivanting about, having sex against trees, what have you. And my constant thought is, what the hell are the maids saying about this? Because they are seeing everything. And they're not as unfeeling or unthinking as the aristocracy would have you believe. They are, in fact, complete human beings with their own hopes and dreams and opinions, and they are not going to just magically not form opinions about their employers.
There's downstairs.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I think, so both of you write very, very inclusive books. I mean, I'm not sure if I love the word inclusive anymore because I don't know if it means what we want it to mean. But you both chose to go towards indie publishing. Is that because of the publishers who wouldn't publish your kinds of books?
Yeah.
Did you query and find out that you were just not gonna get any traction?
I didn't actually query. I'm debating querying for my like big, more Romantasy series. But I like when I started writing Monster, it was like not one of the publishers will publish this book. We're seeing, Berkeley is publishing some. I'm trying to remember the others, but I have like friends that have, but it was a non-starter. You know what I mean? Like, don't even try. I have been approached by a publisher and they wanted to publish my book. They wanted to like republish a Polar Expedition and start there. And they said, but like in the end, can we make him like a guy? Like anthropomorphic, like he can be like a little hairy, but can he not be a bear? And I was like, thank you so much for your time. And like, I know that like, I will be very transparent that like, in my books, I write the world I want to see. So there are queer people living their lives. In my second book, one of her children comes out as trans, and it's just like, let's go shopping, let's get you clothes that like reinforce that feeling. And I know that like, I don't want to have to convince anybody that that my books are worth reading and worth selling, because I know that I have readers that those books mean a lot to already. Maybe at some point I will query. But right now I'm kind of like, I think what I write is important. And I just don't want to waste my time trying to convince somebody else that it's important. That sounds like horrible, but like I could be writing, or I could be like writing query letters and doing all this stuff. And also like, it's terrible to say, but like I do okay publishing indie. This isn't my full-time job, but it like fully funds my art addiction. And like, it's kind of like, I'm not 100% sold what I'm gonna get giving a bunch of rich people a cut of the money that I make from my art.
I'm with that. Also, didn't you just sell 400 books in a weekend for a Monster erotica?
I did.
Oh, there you go, mortgage done.
Yeah.
Thanks for that money. How about you, Sebastian? You gonna waste your time?
Really? When I was, growing up, almost no queer fiction readily available. As I began writing, there was kind of a trend online of what they call pull to publish fan fiction. Whereas you write your fan fiction, it gets a lot of attention online, a small press approaches you, they say, we'll publish this, you pull it offline, change the name, scrub it, and republish. Some of you may have heard of 50 Shades of Grey. But because of the circles I run in, what I was noticing is a lot of the pull of published fan fiction was originally about two dudes, then it would get pulled, then someone's name and pronouns would be changed, it would be republished as a heterosexual romance. And we were told time and time again, this is the only way your story is getting published. It's about a dude and a lady. No two dudes, no two ladies. Like, God forbid anyone have a different gender, right? Outside of dude or lady. Yeah. So it got to a point where I was just like, I'm not interested in writing about straight people, no offense to straight people. And I'm not interested in explaining, much in your vein, why queer stories matter to straight people. I don't have time for that. I'm busy writing.
Well, and I think that like, we have to spend a lot of time doing that in our everyday lives. Obviously, I'm a cis woman, so I probably have to do it way less than you. And that's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting to have to explain like why you matter to someone. And so like, why would you want to have to explain why your stories matter when there are people that like already know and agree and are like, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we already have to explain like, here's why you should care about people that are different than you.
There's also KJ Charles, if anyone has read her historicals, yes. The
All
reason
of them.
she started self-publishing was that she worked for a publisher who said, hey, you write, why don't you go with some of your manuscripts? And she said, okay, here's my manuscript about 2 dudes. And they said, well, 2 dudes won't sell, so you can have this back. And she was like, okay, bet. And she put it online herself. And wouldn't you know what, she's doing rather okay for herself.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, well. Do you think do you think that the community that you live in terms of monster romance or romantasy and, that, I'm again using it inclusive, has been supportive enough of your work that you've been able to do this as regularly as you have? And because I love the romance community, I think it's super supportive, and I'm just so amazed always that, you know, they're like seeing this Costa, once she made a name for herself, she started talking about other authors. You know, so like, where are you finding those pockets where you can find the support you need to do the work you need to do?
I think a lot of my community is in like Discord communities and like on Instagram. And I think that like in my experience anyway, indie authors tend to be like, and especially both monster romance and romantasy tend to be like incredibly supportive of each other. And the readers tend to be incredibly supportive as well. And I think that's absent that, I would not be able to do this. Like, I'm sure there are people that are more dedicated than me that like would be able to, but like I need that community in order to like wake up an hour early and do that before my day job. And I need that community to be able to, I do a lot of marketing on socials. And so like, I really rely on it because also we have to rely on, like, we have to have a community to find editors. We have to like rely on our communities to find alpha and beta readers and sensitivity readers. And I think that at least the circles that I'm in, really, we hold each other accountable as well. And so like, there are definitely times when somebody would be like, hey, did you get a sensitivity reader for that? And without our community, I wouldn't have found those people that like make my books better than they would have been otherwise. I might have lost the plot, I'm sorry.
HR lost a while ago too. No, Sebastian, where's your community? Where do you find, you know, the support you need?
It is largely online, I think, because most of our lives are online these days. And the queer romance community in particular, like queer people have always kind of had to go like under, over, and around to find each other, particularly under systems of oppression. And like, yeah, it's very similarly just kind of over and over again, making yourself reach out and be like, hey, I think we have something in common. Do you want to be the one to say it? A lot of that, but yeah, like the online world has made that easier in some ways, just to be able to kind of send those signals to each other.
So I think you guys are a little bit younger than me, but I heard in at lunchtime, the authors talking about RWA and the implosion of RWA and the loss of the community that supported the authors there, even though it was super problematic. So I don't know if anybody here that was in there, you know, I'm sorry if I'm giving away something that you want to talk about. I want to mention, how did you reconnect with the community?
So I was never in RWA, but we are building a new Romance Writers Guild. That should be, this is probably secret information. I'm on the board, that we're hoping to sit in the place of what we've lost with RWA, but with a better focus. If that makes sense, and so people are gonna be able to join starting in 2026, but I think in the fall, you'll start hearing more about it, and right now, we're calling ourselves the RWG, so the Romance Writers Guild. So keep an eye out for.
Are librarians allowed to join?
But I think they're starting, probably, I know they're going to open up to professionals in the industry, which to me includes librarians. After the initial like push, so we are trying to rectify what was lost, when all of that went down.
But part of the issue with RWA was that it really did push traditionally published authors.
Yeah.
So it feels like there needs to be a place for indie authors to find each other, not by accident, you know?
And also there's gonna be indie included.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Tara?
So because my head is very much in environmental news and completely out of it for everything else, joined RWA like months after the implosion. Yeah, and you would say, but actually, because at that point, everything had imploded, they were then in the process of rebuilding. And the people that I met who were in the process of doing that rebuilding appeared to be very earnest, and my experiences have been incredibly positive as an indie author, and they have a whole indie author track. So I mean, I found as an indie that, you know, I was invited to speak at or do a workshop at the national conference, like Medical Romance Participation, responsible, and I looked on shelves in my order. We've been doing a book club last summer. We're doing a summer half the month. And that's been through RWA. So for me, it has been very positive. But I was fortunate. What happened before?
It's rough. I mean, it's certainly, from what I understand, a lack of trust in the organization. But I'm glad that you've had a good experience.
There is for the people who left, and for the people who never joined. But there, for the people who stayed to try and rebuild, and it's not like a white organization, you know, through RWA, I met Jackson, Reflect, and I'm biracial myself, so it's like not a, I don't know, which is not to discount the experience that many people have.
Yeah.
I think the monster romance community in particular, though, it's like, once you kind of mention the one thing, you're in the club. Like, we were just chatting over here and Snake Man came up in conversation, and then I'm like, okay. And then we all get so enthusiastic with each other because like, we know you love this like little weird niche thing that now other people are finding, and like, it's like, okay, you're in the club, let's talk about this. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that I have seen evolve with Sienna Costa and having a monster romance specific event that you hosted and all of that good stuff. So I just think it's awesome that people can come and say, I enjoy this, and you just say, hey, I'm a fan of this too, and it's like, you're Instabud, you can have the conversation with the people behind, like, and all of that. So thank you so much for putting this on, Meena.
I certainly do, and I actually get such a kick out of CM because she says that I'm an honorary member of Patreon. Any last questions? Thoughts? Well, thank you so much. I know it's. Thank you.